The gavel slammed like a gunshot, and the courtroom froze as if the air itself had been sentenced. "Order!" barked Judge Harold Grayson, his voice a blade slicing through the murmurs. But nobody missed the smirk curling on his lips when he found a black woman who dared to stare him down. Amara Ellis stood at the defendant's table, her hands steady despite the chains of contempt she felt tightening around her. She wasn't here for theft or violence, but for something far more insidious, existing in a world that judged her skin before her soul. The fine $2,000 for disorderly conduct during a protest against racial profiling felt like a personal vendetta, not justice. The crowd behind her buzzed, some with outrage, others with approval, but Amara's eyes never left Grayson's. They burned with a fire that said she'd seen worse, survived worse, and would rise again. The small town of Fairview, Georgia, was no stranger to tension. Its history was a patchwork of old segregation scars, whispered slurs, and a justice system that bent toward those with the right names and faces. Amara, a 34-year-old civil rights lawyer, had returned to her hometown after a decade in Atlanta, not to stir trouble, but to heal it. She'd founded a community center, mentored kids, and fought for those the system chewed up. But to Grayson, she was just another loud voice, another black face challenging his authority. He didn't know her name carried weight far beyond his dusty courtroom. "Pay the fine or face 30 days, Grayson snapped, leaning back in his chair, satisfied. He'd seen her kind before activists who thought they could outtalk the law. The crowd shifted, a few gasps cutting through the silence. Amara's lawyer, a nervous young man named Tim, fumbled with his papers, whispering, "We can appeal this, Amara. Don't escalate." But escalation was already in the air, thick as smoke. She stepped forward, her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. "Your Honor, you fine me for speaking truth, but you won't fine the officers who profiled my client. Where's the justice in that?" The room erupted shouts of agreement, jeers of disdain. Grayson's face reddened, his gavel slamming again. "Another word, Ms. Ellis, and I'll hold you in contempt." But Amara wasn't done. She couldn't be. Not when she'd spent her life fighting for kids like Jamal Carter, the 17-year-old whose arrest for loitering sparked the protest. Jamal, a straight-A student, had been handcuffed outside a convenience store for no reason other than his skin. Amara had been there, rallying the community, when the police pushed back hard. Her disorderly conduct was shouting for them to stop beating a teenager. Now here she was paying the price for their sins. Grayson's smirk faded as Amara's gaze held steady. Something about her unnerved him, not fear, but a quiet power he couldn't place. He didn't know she'd argued before federal judges, swayed juries, and had the ear of senators. To him, she was just a local troublemaker. But the truth was creeping closer, and it would unravel everything. The courtroom doors swung open, and a man in a sharp suit strode in, his presence commanding silence. It was Daniel Reese, a reporter from the Atlanta Chronicle, whose articles on systemic racism had shaken state politics. He'd been following Amara's work for months, and his arrival wasn't random. "Your Honor," he called, holding up a press badge. "I'd like to clarify something before this goes further." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Reese. Sit down or leave." But Reese didn't sit. He spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of 1,000 eyes watching. "Amara Ellis isn't just some protester. She's the lead counsel for the Carter case, representing Jamal Carter in a federal lawsuit against this county's police department. She's also the woman who got the governor to sign the Fair Policing Act last year." The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling like wildfire. Grayson's face paled, his gavel frozen mid-air. Amara didn't flinch, but her heart raced. She hadn't wanted the Isher name splashed across headlines, her work weaponized in a courtroom stunt. But Reese wasn't done. If you fine her, you're fining a woman who's been nominated for the NAACP's Freedom Award. You're fining someone who's exposed corruption in this very county. Is that the legacy you want, Judge? The room was a powder keg. Spectators leaned forward, phones discreetly recording. Tim, her lawyer, looked like he might faint. Grayson's jaw tightened, but doubt flickered in his eyes. He'd miscalculated badly. Amara wasn't just a name on a docket. She was a force, and the world was watching. For years, Amara had fought battles like this quietly, strategically. Growing up in Fairview, she'd known prejudice intimately. The teacher who assumed she'd cheat, the cop who followed her home, the neighbors who whispered trouble when her family moved in. She'd left for law school to arm herself, not with anger but with knowledge. Now, back in her hometown, she was fighting for kids who reminded her of her younger self, bright, bold, and unfairly targeted. Jamal's case had been her breaking point. She'd seen the bruises on his arms, heard his mother's sobs. The protest wasn't planned. It was a spark that caught fire when the community saw one of their own humiliated. Amara had stood between Jamal and the batons, her voice a shield. But shields don't stop gavels, and Grayson's fine was meant to silence her. Instead, it amplified her. "Your Honor," Amara said, her voice steady now. "This isn't about me. It's about a system that fines a woman for defending a boy but lets his abusers walk free. If you think $2,000 will stop me, you don't know who I am." The crowd roared, some cheering, others shouting slurs. Grayson banged his gavel, but it was like trying to stop a storm. Reese stepped closer, his phone out, live streaming to thousands. "Judge Grayson, the world's watching. What's your next move?" The question hung like a guillotine. Grayson's legacy, 30 years on the bench, a reputation for tough but fair, was crumbling. He'd find Amara without checking her file, assuming she was powerless. Now he faced a choice: double down or admit fault. The tension was unbearable. Amara's eyes locked on Grayson's, not with triumph but with a challenge. Do better. The crowd held its breath, waiting for his response. Somewhere in the back, Jamal's mother clutched her son's hand, tears streaking her face. This wasn't just about a fine, it was about a town, a system, a history on trial. Grayson cleared his throat, his voice strained. "Ms. Ellis, in light of new information, I'll reconsider the fine. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell, weaker this time, and the room exploded cheers, boos, chaos. Amara exhaled, her shoulders sagging. She'd won, but the fight was far from over. As the crowd spilled out, Reese approached her, grinning. "You're a legend, Amara. This is going viral." She shook her head, exhaustion creeping in. "I don't want viral. I want change." But change was coming whether Grayson liked it or not. The truth of who Amara Washer worked, her courage had cracked the facade of Fairview's justice system, and she was just getting started. Outside, the Georgia sun beat down on the courthouse steps, where protesters and counter-protesters clashed. Amara stepped into the chaos, her head high. Jamal ran to her, his eyes wide. "You did that for me?" he asked, voice small. She knelt, meeting his gaze. "For you, and everyone like you." The crowd surged around them, some chanting her name, others hurling insults. But Amara stood tall, a beacon in the storm. The courthouse steps were a battleground of voices, a cacophony of rage and hope. Amara Ellis stood at the center, her presence a lightning rod for the crowd's emotions. Protesters waved signs demanding justice for Jamal Carter, their chants of "no more lies," clashing with the bitter jeers of counter-protesters shouting, "Respect the law." The air crackled with the kind of tension that could spark a riot or a revolution. Amara's heart pounded, but her face remained a mask of calm. She'd learned long ago that showing fear in Fairview was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Jamal, still clutching his mother's hand, looked up at her. His eyes, wide with a mix of awe and confusion, held a question he didn't voice. What now? Amara squeezed his shoulder, her touch grounding him. We keep going, she whispered, though the words were as much for herself as for him. The crowd parted slightly as Daniel Reese, the reporter, pushed through, his phone still recording. Amara, this is bigger than Fairview now, he said, his voice urgent. The live stream's at 50,000 views. People are calling you a hero. She shook her head, her braids swaying. I'm no hero, Daniel. I'm just tired of burying kids like Jamal under fines and felonies. Her words were soft but carried the weight of years spent fighting battles most never saw. Reese nodded, respecting her resolve, but his eyes gleamed with the hunger of a story that could change everything. As they spoke, a shadow loomed nearby. Sheriff Tom Hargrove, a barrel-chested man with a reputation for bending the law to his will, stood at the edge of the crowd, his deputies flanking him. His gaze locked on Amara, cold and calculating. Hargrove had been the one to order Jamal's arrest, and his department was the target of Amara's federal lawsuit. To him, she wasn't just a lawyer, she was a threat to the fragile order he'd maintained for decades. Ms. Ellis, he called, his voice dripping with false civility. You're stirring up trouble again. The crowd hushed, sensing a new confrontation. Amara turned, her posture unyielding. Trouble, Sheriff? Or accountability? Your deputies beat a teenager for buying a soda. That's the trouble here. A murmur of agreement rippled through the protesters, but Hargrove's smirk didn't waver. Careful now, he said, stepping closer. You're playing a dangerous game, and this town doesn't take kindly to outsiders. Outsider. Amara's laugh was sharp, bitter. I was born 3 blocks from here. You don't get to erase my roots because I fight back. The crowd roared, some clapping, others shouting slurs. A bottle sailed through the air, shattering near Hargrove's feet. His deputies tensed, hands on their holsters, but Amara raised a hand, her voice cutting through the chaos. Enough! We're not here to break things. We're here to fix them. Her words didn't calm everyone, but they shifted the energy, pulling the crowd back from the brink. Hargrove's smirk faded, replaced by a scowl. He leaned in, his voice low so only she could hear. You think you're untouchable because some reporters got your back? This town's got a long memory, Ellis. Watch yourself. He turned and walked away, his deputies trailing like loyal dogs. Amara's stomach twisted, but she refused to let him see her flinch. Reese, still filming, whispered, That's going on the record. Amara nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. Hargrove's threat wasn't idle. Fairview had a history of silencing dissent, from slashed tires to late-night arrests. She'd seen it happen to others, and now, with her name in the spotlight, the target on her back was growing. Back inside the courthouse, Judge Grayson sat in his chambers, his hands trembling as he scrolled through his phone. The live stream had spread like wildfire, and social media was ablaze with hashtags. Justice for Jamal, Amara Ellis, Fairview Falls. Comments called him a bigot, a relic, a disgrace. His legacy, once a point of pride, was now a punchline. He'd find Amara on impulse, assuming she was just another loud activist. He hadn't checked her file, hadn't known she was a legal titan who'd taken down corrupt officials in Atlanta. Now, his mistake was public and the world was watching. His clerk, a young woman named Sarah, knocked softly. Sir, the mayor's on the phone. He wants to know how you're handling the situation. Grayson rubbed his temples, the weight of his 30-year career pressing down. "Tell him I'm handling it," he snapped, though he had no plan. Sarah hesitated, then added, "There's a protest planned tomorrow. They're demanding your resignation." Grayson's head jerked up, his face ashen. "Resignation? For one fine?" "It's not just the fine, sir," Sarah said quietly. "It's what it represents." She left, closing the door softly, leaving Grayson alone with his thoughts. He stared at Amara's file, now open on his desk. Her credentials were staggering. Top of her class at Emory Law, lead counsel on landmark cases, a TED Talk with millions of views. How had he missed this? Pride, he realized. Pride and prejudice. Outside, Amara was strategizing with her team at the community center. A small brick building filled with donated books and folding chairs. Tim, her lawyer, was pacing, his tie loosened. "Amara, you can't keep poking the bear. Hargrove's got connection, state police, local judges. If they come for you, a viral video won't save you." She leaned back, her fingers drumming on the table. "They're already coming, Tim. The question is, do we run or fight?" The room fell silent. Jamal's mother, Lena, spoke up, her voice shaky but firm. "You fought for my boy when no one else would. I'm with you, Amara. Whatever it takes." The others nodded, volunteers, activists, parents who'd lost faith in the system but found hope in her. Amara felt the weight of their trust, heavy but grounding. "Then we fight," she said. "But we do it smart. Hargrove wants chaos so he can justify cracking down. We give him order, organized, loud, undeniable." The next day, Fairview's streets were a sea of signs and voices. The protest was peaceful but massive, stretching from the courthouse to the police station. Amara led the march, Jamal at her side, his bruises fading but his resolve growing. Reese's article had dropped that morning, detailing the county's history of racial profiling, with Amara's courtroom stand as the centerpiece. National news outlets were picking it up, and calls for a federal investigation were mounting. Inside the courthouse, Grayson watched from his window, his stomach churning. The mayor had called again, urging him to fix this before the governor got involved. Grayson knew what that meant. Sacrifice his pride or his career. He'd spent decades believing he was fair, impartial. But Amara's words echoed. A system that fines a woman for defending a boy but lets his abusers walk free. He saw it now, the blind spots, the assumptions, the weight of his gavel's misuse. He called Sarah in. "Draft a statement. I'm vacating the fine and issuing a public apology to Ms. Ellis." Sarah's eyes widened, but she nodded. "And sir, what about the Carter case?" Grayson hesitated, then said, "Recommend a review. Independent. No local influence." It wasn't enough, but it was a start. By noon, the news broke. Grayson's apology was trending, and the fine was gone. The crowd outside cheered, but Amara wasn't celebrating. She stood on a makeshift stage, megaphone in hand. "This isn't victory," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "A dropped fine doesn't erase Jamal's bruises or the system that put them there. We keep fighting until every kid in Fairview can walk home without fear." The crowd roared, but not everyone agreed. Across the street, counter-protesters shouted, "Go back to Atlanta!" and worse. Amara ignored them, her focus on the faces before her, young, old, black, white, all united by a shared hunger for change. She thought of her younger self, the girl who'd once run from Fairview's hate. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who'd learned to stand, to speak, to fight. That night, Amara sat in her small apartment, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face. Emails poured in, support from activists, threats from anonymous cowards, requests for interviews. She ignored them all, her eyes on a photo of her parents, who'd raised her to believe justice was worth fighting for. She'd made progress today, but Hargrove was still out there, and the system was far from fixed. The next morning, she woke to news that shook her. Hargrove had been suspended pending an investigation, sparked by Reese's article and public pressure. It wasn't justice, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. Amara smiled, a rare moment of lightness. She'd keep pushing, for Jamal, for Fairview, for every kid who deserved better. The fight wasn't over, but Amara Ellis was just getting started. Her story, Fairview's story, was a mirror held up to the world. Was justice possible in a town divided by history? Could one woman's courage shift a system's weight? Share your thoughts. Where do you stand on the line between right and wrong, justice and division?